So this is the session for Web AppBuilder for ArcGIS, a deep dive into enterprise deployments. My name is Mark Torrey. I'm a Esri employee in professional services. I'm based out of the Charlotte office. So day to day, I kind of work with clients implementing ArcGIS, different patterns and practices. My colleague, Nick Brueggemann, is out of the St. Louis office.
Yep, I'm in the St. Louis office, so I'm in professional services. I do a lot of project work, so it's very similar to what you guys will do using Web AppBuilder to create applications for customers. That's my job, so that's why they bring me into this, to kind of hit things from the perspective that you guys are dealing with every day.
Cool. Yeah, so kind of a show of hands, we kind of like to get an idea of who we're talking to and kind of what our audience is. So how many of you guys out there are ArcGIS Enterprise kind of users? Awesome. And how about ArcGIS Online? Everybody use ArcGIS Online? Oh, that's cool. Awesome. So, all right. So kind of a brief overview of what we'll be looking at. I'm going to talk about some of the kind of typical patterns that we see in professional services in regards to ArcGIS Enterprise and using Web AppBuilder in and with ArcGIS Enterprise. I'll go through some of the basics of some, getting it running, installing on your machine, some configuration, a little bit of security, and then Nick's gonna get to do all the fun stuff. He's gonna get into the actual development and kind of best practices there. Then we'll come back, we'll talk about deploying these apps that you've generated and a little bit of post-deployment ideas, tips, tricks, so on and so forth. We'll generally kind of jump back and forth in between slides and go onto our machine, so bear with us if we have audio, video. So we kind of like to clarify what enterprise deployment is, and kind of, I guess, us in professional services tend to think of it as enterprise, not only the product, but a large user base, right? We've got a lot of people using the system. There's a centralized area for that system. It's a canonical source of information that everybody can go to. And so that's kind of what we, throughout the talk we'll say enterprise, meaning that. We want a lot of collaboration with lots of users from a central location. So the first kind of step in that is defining where that centralized location is, right? And so we have ArcGIS Online, which is a completely ESRI managed, ESRI responsible for multi-tenant scalable system, right? And then we have ArcGIS Enterprise, right? That's where you are in control of the software, you install it on your infrastructure. You're responsible for keeping it updated, for controlling the service level agreement, right? So it's kind of in your hands. And then part of that is it's never a black or white issue. And professional services, we see kind of the entire spectrum of implementations and setups. And I know going on site and installing, working with clients, no two trips are ever the same. There's usually everybody has a small difference in their system or security, so we usually see some hybrid. And ArcGIS Enterprise out of the box, that hybrid piece comes in the terms of portal using ArcGIS Online base maps, right? Some of the Living Atlas stuff. There's things that Enterprise uses from ArcGIS Online, and that's if you have that capability, that connectivity. If not, ArcGIS Enterprise allows you to go completely disconnected. Right, so we can completely disconnect from the outside world and run our enterprise there. So that's where the enterprise lives, right? Is it ArcGIS Online or is it enterprise? So once we've got our kind of base of operations set up, we're going to jump into Web AppBuilder, right? So out of the box, we have the embedded version of Web AppBuilder. And so this is a web app that allows you to build web apps. The ArcGIS Online version is fully hosted, fully integrated in the system, and built in, right? We don't have to worry about upgrading it. We don't have to worry about kind of maintaining that application. And then we have and the same applies on the portal side, right? So Web AppBuilder's built into Portal. When you install Web AppBuilder, when you install Portal, you get that same version of Web AppBuilder. So for the developer edition, right, Esri has taken that code from ArcGIS Online and packaged and bundled that up into a zip file. So you can go out and download the source code and run Web AppBuilder outside of Portal or ArcGIS Online. There's pros and cons to both, right? So the embedded version, you're kind of limited customization-wise to what we provide in terms of widgets and themes, right? It's not really supported to change or modify that built-in version. With the developer edition, that world kind of opens up, and we as developers can go in, create our own widgets, modify themes, run code. We can have direct access to that app. The embedded versions, right, we have to go in, go create a web map, and then when you share that web map, it becomes available to open in the embedded version of Web AppBuilder. So being that this is the Dev Summit, we're going to kind of focus mostly on the developer edition, right? That's what we're going to be talking about. I do have one slide about the embedded version, but we'll get there and I'll talk about it. So we got our portal, we've got our Web AppBuilder. Kind of what we've seen, common patterns. Like I said, there's usually kind of shades of gray. I mean, by far, I think, at least for me, the most common pattern that we see and that I work with is Portal and Dev Edition of Web AppBuilder. And then what you'll see is as your organizations get smaller, then you move to ArcGIS Online, right, to store all your items, and use Dev Edition locally using ArcGIS Online as that portal, and then the portal with the embedded version, and then ArcGIS Online with the embedded version. And just a note, kind of on the patterns. A lot of the times, when clients will call me up and say, hey, we need to have an application to do X, Y, and Z. A lot of the times we'll kind of take a iterative approach to these, right? And take that hybrid approach. We'll say, okay, well, let's stand up a quick embedded version using ArcGIS Online, kind of get the main functionality running, put it out there, let our users kind of hit it, use it, and then those questions start coming in. Oh, well, this is a great app, but I'd like to add this widget, or I'd like this widget to actually do this instead of, Z. So at that point, then we can take Web AppBuilder, download it, load it up, use those same items that we were using before, whether those are from Portal, and we have now access to that full source code. All right. So hopefully everybody's kind of gone out. You can go to developers.arcgis.com and find the Web AppBuilder Dev Edition. And so when you download that zip file, you extract it, you put it on your machine somewhere, or in this case, you want to put it on a server. The first question we kind of wanted to answer is where the JavaScript API is coming from, right? Because by default, in the downloaded version, it's going to use our CDN, right? And go out to js.arcgis.com and grab the latest version of the API and use that, right? And that's great for getting started, but again, in instances or organizations where we might not have that connectivity, or we just want to manage the JavaScript API ourselves, you can download the JavaScript API and set that up on your system and point your portal to use that. In this case, portal already comes with a version of the API. Let's see if we can bring this up here. All right, so I've got a portal here installed locally on my machine. All right, and if I look at the web adapter and then JavaScript API, JavaScript API, all right, I can see that we've already got a hosted version of the JavaScript API for us. They're all good. All right. Okay, one other kind of quick important note, as you guys probably all know, the Web AppBuilder Developer Edition is built on top of Node.js. So like think of Node, and I guess essentially it is kind of a headless Chrome instance. Is that
Basically,
a good?
yeah.
Yeah. So there's several different ways to run that, to start the Web App Builder, right? By default, we use the startup.bat. So this is just a bat file that we can start up. Double click. It's going to spin up that Web App Builder version. All right, we get some output here. Hopefully we come up. Okay, so our app comes up. So what that means is every time you want to use Web App Builder, you have to double click that startup.bat, right? Not necessarily the best option. So one of the other options, if you have Node installed locally, we can come in here and see if we have Node. All right, that looks good. I can come into my extracted version. Is that big enough? Let me see if I can make that bigger. Is it good visible-wise? If we have a Node installed version, and we can come right into the Web App Builder directories, right? So I've downloaded this onto my C drive under the WAB directory, gone into the folder. I've just called it 2.7-ds. I'm going to just go into the server directory there, all right? See everything there. There's a server.js file. If I say node server.js, that'll perform essentially what the .bat file is doing. All right, let's start up that port again. That comes up. We can refresh this guy. And we've got our app running again. Okay, so we'll stop that. And one of the nice things that the Web App Builder team has provided to us is there is a NPM script in the install, right, called install Windows service. And what that's going to do is take that node command and run it through a process and install it as a Windows service on our machine. All right, so I can go into services now, refresh it, and now I've got a ArcGIS Web AppBuilder service running. I can start that. Come back in here and refresh it. All right, so the app kind of runs as normal. What's nice about that is you don't have to worry about going into startup.bat, running it each time. You know, and kind of as you'll see further on, what we're going to do is share this Web AppBuilder instance with our organization, so we don't want to have to kind of manage that. And this running as a Windows service allows it to run kind of on demand as we need it. Okay, back to cards here. So I know kind of hopefully everybody's worked with app IDs. Creating an app ID, you want to log into your portal, and this is kind of it's a little bit out of order because of the node demo. But before you can run Web AppBuilder, you'll need to generate an app ID on your portal. So you want to come into your content, create an application, give it a title, tags, all the necessary items there. Right, and then scroll down to the bottom and you'll see this registration info. And so what Web AppBuilder is going to do is say, I need to talk to a portal somewhere, right? And I need to make sure that we have items we can use and have some connection to the portal. So the redirect URI here is really important because Web AppBuilder is going to go out, talk to the portal, and then portal is going to tell Web AppBuilder, send a kind of a request back and say, okay, we'll send a request to this URL that's authenticated, right? And so I know I've kind of scratched, gotten into some trouble with these redirect URIs, but essentially you want to make sure that your URLs point back to the Web AppBuilder version and app that you're using. All right. Okay, so where does that live? If we look at, I've got code here. All right, so I'm just going to take this guy out. Let me sign out. All right, so in the Web AppBuilder code here, there is and I'm just looking at the server directory here, and there's a signininfo.json file, right? So every time you sign in and provide that app ID, it's going to write information to that. I just took the app ID out of mine, and you'll notice now it's looking at, I'm going to just repaste it in here. Right, it's going to ask me to sign in. I sign in, and now every time I go back, right, that's persisted, and we can log in. Portal knows who I am. Right, my account should be logged in there. Yeah. So the app IDs kind of are important and can be confusing and head scratching sometimes, but all right. So that handles kind of getting it going and running, configuring it. Now that we've got our Web AppBuilder app running as a Windows service, right? It's accessible to all. We can take that item and share it with featured apps. So if I come back over to my portal here, you see I've got a shared item. I can come in there and just click it, and I'm off and running, right, in Web App Builder. We're good to go. Okay, so this kind of jumps out of the Dev Edition a little bit, but I thought this was kind of cool, and I wanted to show it real quick to you guys. I think last year, I don't know, do you remember, Nick, when the custom hosting widgets, was it last year? Yeah. So now we have a way to actually host custom widgets inside the portal, right? So Nick is going to write these cool widgets. I say, oh, I like those widgets. I want to put them, in my portal for my embedded version users to have available. All right. So what we need to do with that is we need to create a virtual directory, right, somewhere, enable anonymous access, enable HTTPS, enable CORS, allow it to handle JSON, because actually what it's going to do is push out the manifest files of our custom widgets. Right. So we're going to go in, kind of like we did before with the application ID, but we're going to check this application extension. I don't know if it's highlighted there, the extension builder. And then for the manifest URL, you'll want to give the virtual directory path to the manifest of your widget. Right, so here on my machine, I've got this directory called custom widgets. Within that, I've got a select export custom widget. Within that directory, there's a manifest file, right? And this just kind of is the metadata for the widget, right? It shows, what it is, what it does, kind of information about it, right? So I've got that folder, and I could stick a bunch of widgets in there, but I need to go register each widget manifest separately as a separate item. All right. And over here in IIS, I've got that custom widgets virtual directory. So if we go back to portal, I'm going to open up a web map. Sign in. I'm going to share this guy. Create that. Web App Builder. All right, now remember, this is kicking off the embedded version. And just real quick, just kind of wanted to give you an idea of what this looks like. So if we go into widgets, I'm going to add a widget. Now I've got this custom tab over here, right? And there's my custom widget. So I could go and add that to my app and running, off and running, right? So one thing to note is when you register that application ID, that actually takes that information in the manifest and stores it in the portal item. So if you update that at any time, you want to update your app ID, right? Because once you kind of register it, kind of breaks that information. Okay, I didn't have that highlighted. Kind of to jump back to our Web App Builder version, right? We've got that running and shared, and it's accessible. And we kind of want to disable the embedded version now because we want people to use our local version. So we're going to go through and show how to disable the Web App Builder tab from the portal. Right? There's an error on that slide there. I need to update the version. But essentially what you have in your portal directory here, right? That's the good version, 10.6, right? There's a config.js file. And within that file, All right, it's a ton of portal configuration settings. All right, so you can come in here and tweak settings for your portal. The one we're kind of interested in is Web AppBuilder enabled. All right, we can just switch that to true, to false. All right, save it, restart the portal. I won't do that now. I don't want to restart our portal. But you'll just go into services, restart your portal for ArcGIS, and that'll remove that tab. Look at here, right, from the sharing dialog. Right, so now when we go in, create web app, we just get the configured new web app. We don't get the Web AppBuilder tab there. So a little bit on the security and HTTPS certificates. Right? We have Web AppBuilder ships with self-signed certs. Those are stored in the cacert.pem file and cakey.pem file, and those are usually fine for local development and getting started. But generally, if we're going to be serving this to a lot of users, will want to embed our CA signed certs. And you'll notice that when I go into Web AppBuilder here, right, I get those nice green locks. Right. And that's just because we at Esri have a certificate server, right? So we can go in, request certs for our machines. And so we took those, converted them into PEM files. I won't go into kind of doing that now, but if we look, I just converted that certificate from my certificate authority into a PEM file with a key, and replaced the original ones. And now our Web AppBuilder running on 3344 port is valid and secure. All right. Okay. So that's it for me. On to Nick.
All right, thanks Mark. So now you've got Enterprise Builder kind of up and running. You've got it installed. You started developing, poking around, and doing some things. I'm going to take you on a journey about a year later, where you've got multiple developers, you've got a ton of custom logic that you've written, you've got a bunch of widgets, and you're trying to wrangle that. So that's where we get into the enterprise development space. So what are we talking about when we talk about enterprise development? Like I said, generally it's a project that's got more than one developer that's contributing to it. Typically, it's a project that's deployed into multiple environments. So like Mark was saying, you've got a bunch of users, you don't want to just deploy everything straight out to production. So you've got a development server, you've got a staging server, you've got your production server, you've got these different stages, good, clean development practices. And then usually it's a project that's grown to a significant amount of complexity. And so what do I mean by that? Oftentimes in professional services, we kind of run the gamut of what people want. It starts with a user's like, hey, that one widget that's out of the box is cool. We want to customize that a little bit. We've got other talks that kind of go into that, so I'm not going to hit that. I'm going to hit and focus on the things where you've got logic that just doesn't fit cleanly into a single widget. And we run into that all the time. There's pros and cons to it, and I want to spend a little bit of time talking about that. And then the real fun one is when you're digging down into the guts of Web AppBuilder itself and you're starting to tweak things down there. We find ourselves doing that as well. So that's what I'm going to focus on here. This is down the road stuff when things are getting fun. So a little bit about source code management paradigms. You're working with multiple people, so you've got to have this in place. There's a few different ways to do it. I've seen a bunch of different ways that people tackle this issue. And we definitely have a recommended approach, but like everything else, there's not one size that fits all. It's really going to vary on what it is you're trying to accomplish and how your organization does things. So these are what I see. I see people not having any source control. Please don't do that. That's great if you just started with Web AppBuilder and you're just poking around and getting going. That's cool. Don't source code control your playground. But when you're developing things for production, you absolutely have to have that in place. So we see with the second one here, there's some people that will source control just everything. You don't need to source control Web AppBuilder itself. That's not really necessary. Typically what we do is we keep the zip, we unzip the zip, and then we've got that stored somewhere else in our directory structure, which I'll get into in a second. I see this other one too, where people will create one single application and they'll source code control just that, either by exporting that web app or by going into the server app / whatever your app is at. They'll take that guy and they'll source control that. I mean, that's better. It's better than not having any source control, but there's reasons to not do that. So what we typically recommend is that you only source control the code that you're changing. That way you're keeping your logic separate from Web AppBuilder. And then I'm going to go through what we've got for a build process to take that code that you have and inject it into Web AppBuilder. One of the really good things that gives you is you can upgrade the development edition of Web AppBuilder a lot easier. If you've done this option where you're just controlling your single application and you're kind of going in there and adding stuff to it, you'll get to the point where you're like, hey, we need to upgrade Web AppBuilder versions. What were our changes? What code did we make in there? It's not super clean. So we always recommend keeping your code separate from Web AppBuilder, injecting your widgets. If you do any custom other logic, inject that as well. And the way that we do that is something like this. You know, Web AppBuilder is already built on Node.js. So there's two other packages that Node has called gulp and grunt. They both basically do the same thing. For a while I used grunt, now I use gulp. I don't know, you just change after a while. It's good to kind of look at different things and what they do. But what we set those guys up to do is take the code from your repository, run it through a build process, which can inject it into either STEM app itself or into whatever app that you've created. There's not a really clean way that I've found to say which one goes where. So sometimes I inject it into both of those. Sometimes I inject it into STEM app, and then when you go through the app creation process, it will pull your logic over into the app that it creates. Oftentimes I find myself creating an application and then building into that, so injecting the code into the apps /2. I will show some of this build process in a second, but this is kind of like how it works with gulp. The way that gulp is set up is you build concise tasks, and you can build these tasks for all sorts of stuff. And what I'm doing today is just barely scratching the surface of what we have like our build process do. So these are like the concise steps. We've got a default task that'll run. I'm going to get into this environment thing in a second, but we'll load an environment file, we'll have a configure task, and then these other copy tasks, which will inject the code over there. And then you finish that up with a watch task, which will watch your repository, and then anytime you make changes into that, it copies it over for you. You can build as many of these tasks as you need. So typical examples of other ones that we use is linting. You could throw your unit tests in here. We're in enterprise space. Be unit testing, please. That's great stuff to do. So that's kind of how gulp works. Grunt is the same way. You know, you're building out this build system. I like gulp a little bit better because it's JSON, or it's JavaScript. Grunt is JSON files. With the multi-environment configuration, I've had a lot of really good questions from you guys that talk specifically about this stuff. You know, you've got your application, you want to deploy it into the multiple environments. So a typical configuration that you have will look like this here, where you're specifically pointed to a service. Well, when you build that for the different environments, you need to point that to different services. So that's what we have for the environment part of our build process. We can spit it through and change the configurations to look like this. How we do that is another gulp package. It's called gulp replace, and it uses another node package called yargs where you can pass in environment variables. So we've got our environment variable sitting over here in this dev.json, staging.json, or prod.json. Gulp will pick those up based on the command line argument that you pass it. It will go through with a thing called gulp replace and replace all of these, this at, whatever. The at is not important. It's just to make that stand out, make it easy for gulp to find those instances of those variables to replace. There's nothing that had like triple ats at the beginning or end, so that's why I picked that. And then it generates these configurations for you. So let's take a look at the way that we typically have our development environment set up. Here's that environments file. These are super, super simple. So remember, think big, think lots of URLs, lots of services that we're pointing to. These will have, you know, a variable in there that's pointed to the endpoint that you've got. This is what we have for development. This is what we have for production. That's not a real one, but you get the point, and this is what we have for staging. When we do this, we end up having to source control our configuration files as well. So instead of having those configuration files point to that specific URL, we've got that environment or that variable in there. And then what we do, so this is your web application running. If you open this widget, right now it's pointed to that. When you go in here and you say build this for staging, you can run that. It does its work to replace those variables that we've got. Give it a second. And then when you reload your application, now it will be pointing to the staging server. So you can take that, package that up, and that can be your release to your staging server. Same with production. All that's done via Gulp. We heavily use that stuff, so definitely check that out and look into that. Like I said, we also keep our source code separate from Web AppBuilder. So we have a source folder. In that, we've got our widgets. I've got one single custom widget in this example. It's really tiny. But it gets injected down here into Web AppBuilder itself. So that's how that works. It keeps things clean. And we add this WAB folder to our git ignore so we don't commit that. And then the process we follow is that every developer goes and installs Web AppBuilder on their local machine, and that's how they set up their development environment. This is always a fun topic for me. I love this one because it doesn't take long when you're developing custom applications to get to the point where you can't just write your code in a widget. You feel bad adding all that logic just in that widget folder. So there's absolutely very, very valid reasons for doing this kind of stuff. We find lots of times we'll develop a custom widget and then it'll have a UI element in it that a customer wants somewhere else. So you don't want to duplicate that code. You want to put that in a common spot. And then the question always is, well, if it's not going to go in the widget folder, where does it go? We always put it in the libs folder. So if you look in Web AppBuilder itself, there is, under our applications, there's a libs folder. So we will make a custom folder that goes in here. You could just inject it straight into libs. That would work too, but again, we like to keep things clean. So we would make a folder called custom, and then everything would get injected in here. And then you can include these classes that you create in your widget just like everything else. So here's an example of the UI element in multiple places. This is some filter statistics. We had two widgets that had that same logic. So that went in the libs, and then we had a folder for filter status. And then it's a dojo digit, so your digit files go down in there. When you add things to libs, you have to update your build system. Your build system can't just pull from source, it's also got to pull from libs now. So that's what this is showing. It's a build system, you're constantly having to tweak it as you add other things. There's not much to this slide, but I don't want to gloss over this fact. When you think Web AppBuilder, you're thinking in terms of widgets, and lots of times you want to share those widgets. There's a way in the online version of Portal to add your custom widget to it. If you start going to town adding all this application logic, you can't just pick your widget up and move it. It's got other dependencies. So it's kind of a pro and con thing. If your goal is to make your widget portable, you don't want to do this kind of stuff. If your goal is to have a lot of small components and a lot of application logic, then absolutely go do it. You certainly can. And then just a couple additional tips and tricks to kind of round things out. As we've had multiple projects looking at Web AppBuilder, it's become important to understand what Web AppBuilder is doing and how it's doing its job so we could automate a lot of this stuff. Don't be afraid to look down in there and understand what Web AppBuilder is doing. We're developers, so go tinker, have fun. And then understanding Web AppBuilder configs. Like I said, we source control our own configs because we're doing a lot of variable replacing in there. So having a good familiarity with what those configs are doing is important as well. Get to know GIMU better. GIMU is that framework library that Web AppBuilder is built on. There's a ton of good stuff down there. There's some CSV utilities that I just used for something in one project I was working on. There's some GeoJSON converters down there. There's a whole slew of digits that are available to you to include into your custom widgets too. Use those. It's there for you. And that's all I got. Back to you, Mark.
On my microphone? Okay.
Okay, so a few more slides. So we've kind of have our application built, and then it's kind of what next. So depending on what implementation pattern you've kind of decided on, the deployment of those applications kind of varies, right? So by default, in the embedded versions, that's kind of done for you, right? No problem. We really don't need to do anything. Once we create the app, we have the URL. It's deployed essentially for us. Web apps used as templates, right? So if you save your web app builder and save that as a template, it's hosted from Web App Builder. That's probably not the best place for it to live. We really want to kind of have that in its own home per se, and then the developer edition, right? Applications, right? So this is kind of the fine-grained option where you need to manually deploy this somewhere. And I know kind of in my case, and I think Nick too, is what we'll do is use build tools to deploy the actual applications, right? So we'll have either a cloud server somewhere that I can run a continuous integration on. It'll go out to GitHub, pull all the stuff down, build it, and have our deployed app, right? Okay, I think we're almost there. I did want to show these, the use of proxies. I know, these always come up, and I think, we're working with proxies almost every day. Has everybody gone and used the proxies on GitHub, the proxy? Yeah. All right, so it provides a lot of resources for kind of working with secure services, cores, OAuth logins, token-based authentication. You can log all the requests that come through the proxy. It's pretty cool and helps, because what happens a lot of times is everybody doesn't want their services out there just kind of for anybody to mine and drill and find. So they'll secure their services, develop an application based on these services, and then, well, we really don't want the users in this app to be presented with or prompted for credentials, right? So we can, by using a proxy, we can take those credentials, embed them in the proxy, and the proxy will take care of the authentication for us, and the end user won't be prompted for credentials. So I just have a real quick kind of simple sample here. All right, so it's essentially two files, right? So in our, if I have it here, let's see if I can find it. All right, we'll go out and grab the config file. I'm going to add a URL to some server out there with my username and password in it. All right, and then in my app, where's my app here? All right, configs. All right, I'm going to tell the app to say, hey, any requests for these particular services that live in this URL, I want you to proxy those, authenticate them, and open the app without prompting the users. So if we come in our Web App Builder version here, I've got two apps, both based on the same web map that contains the same item, right? One that is being proxied and one that is not being proxied. So if I look at this here without the proxy, apps should kick off. Hopefully, and I'm prompted for credentials, right? You need to authenticate to see this service. If I look at this app here, everything's working correct. All right, okay, there. So my service comes through. I've got my point right? I didn't get prompted for credentials. What happened is that request, the app made a request. Proxy saw that we were making a request for that particular service, went out, got a token, appended it to the request, passed it back to Web AppBuilder, and we can now use this app without having to prompt our end users for credentials. All right. Okay. So some other Web AppBuilder presentations coming up today. The Advanced Development Tools and Techniques by Gavin and George. That they go pretty deep into actual widget development. And then the JavaScript applications for the enterprise. I don't know, do you know more about that one?
Yeah, I know they've got a build process too for like minifying all of the Web AppBuilder code and then making your package ready to deploy. They'll dig into that too, so that's a really good one.
Yeah. All right, and we do have some time, so yeah, we can take some questions, and please rate us so we can fix what's broken and so on and so forth. So.
And I'll be at the Web AppBuilder Island the rest of the day. So if you have any questions too for me, feel free to swing by.
So lots of great examples you guys have here. When I'm working on a team and I have developers coming on, they're often wanting to get spun up, learning these intricacies and caveats. What resources would you guys suggest pointing new developers to learn kind of these specialty little tips and tricks?
I mean, I would definitely point them to these Web AppBuilder presentations that we're doing. And we've been talking about doing a blog series that goes into depth with these. I think we're going to discuss that more and see if we can get some things out. Because when you get into this stuff, there's a lot of these nuances and a lot of the things that we find ourselves doing a lot that I think would be really helpful for everybody else as well.
Okay. Yeah, we'd look forward to that.
Good question.
Yeah, and a lot of it, like what Nick said, is just grab the developer edition, all those widgets, all the backend, all the stuff that we use to build the builder are in that GMU.js directory. So all like the filtering selects and the selection manager and all those things. Some of them are documented, but you can actually go in. It's an unminified code, so you can go in and actually see how those components are built and how they work from looking at the source code. So a lot of times, what I'll do is I'll just kind of spin up one and see how Web AppBuilder does it. A lot like in the settings and configuration file, a lot of those GMU components are used. So you can kind of say, oh, okay, I want to get a filtering select that filters all the feature layers, point feature layers. Right, I can go look at that component and see how it does it, grab it, or just reference it in my
Yeah, I mean,
my
as
code.
far as the build system stuff, it took even us internally a while to figure out how to streamline that process. So I think a series of articles that talk about that is really good to be doing. In the back?
Yeah, the default port is 3344, and then if you want just HTTP, it's 3345, and HTTPS is 3346. It directs them to that URL, to that port. Yeah. The service. Yeah.
Maybe I missed this, but when you disable the embedded portal, the tab goes away.
Right.
Can you have the tab there, but to redirect it to your dev version instead, so that people are using the custom version straight through the portal without having to type in a different URL?
Right. That's a good point. I don't know. Do you know, Nick?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I don't know. We can check on that if you want to.
It just seems like, you kind of just want to switch it out without people.
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, that's a good point. So.
You don't have a library management thing, so you get the libs for the dependencies. There's not a way to I don't know, have people download those automatically or something. They're using a different instance.
Right. Yeah, come swing by the island, and we can talk about that stuff.
Okay.
Anybody else? All right, well, thanks, guys. We appreciate your time. Have a good rest of the
Yeah.
conference.
We'll be here for a while, so if you want to come